It wasn't the politicians. It wasn't the generals. It wasn't even the revolutionaries in the streets. It was the man in the back room, the one holding the ledger, the one ensuring the liquidity flowed even as the foundation rotted. History remembers the kings who declared the wars. It remembers the emperors who built the monuments, but it often forgets the architect of the financing, the technocrat who made the impossible math look possible. Until it wasn't, we are taught to look at the figurehead on the coin. We rarely look at the mechanism that debases the metal inside it. The pattern is unmistakable. The arithmetic is merciless. Every great empire eventually faces a moment of impossible choice. The commitments exceed the resources. The promises exceed the tax base. The cost of maintaining the structure becomes heavier than the structure itself can bear. In that moment, a specific figure always emerges. Not a warrior, not a philosopher, a banker, a central planner of capital. Their role is always the same: to buy time, to invent a new financial instrument that delays the reckoning, to turn solvency problems into liquidity solutions. They are hailed as geniuses in the beginning. They are celebrated as saviors who kept the lights on. But their legacy is always the same: total currency destruction, social fracture, and the transfer of wealth from the prudent to the connected. This is not a story about a single man in a dark room today. It is a story about a recurring role in the theater of history, a banker who facilitates the decline, the one who hands the addict the needle because the withdrawal would be too painful to bear. To understand where we are today, we must look at the men who played this role before. We must examine the mechanics of the delay, and we must look at the inevitable cost of the solution. The pattern repeats, the incentives align, and the result is written in the ruin of currencies past. It begins in the 16th century, within the sprawling, sun-drenched territories of the Spanish Empire. The ruler is Philip II, a man whose domains stretched from the silver mines of Potosi in the Andes to the bustling ports of the Netherlands. He was the master of the known world, yet he was perpetually broke. The cost of maintaining global hegemony was astronomical. The armies in Flanders, the naval fleets in the Mediterranean, the bureaucracy in Madrid, it all required gold. But gold was heavy, slow, and finite. The solution came not from the king, but from his financiers. The bankers of the time were not shadowy figures in the modern sense, but powerful merchant families, primarily the Fuggers of Augsburg, and later the Genoese. These were the men who understood the mechanics of credit in a world that still believed in hard money. They introduced a financial innovation that would allow the Spanish Empire to spend wealth it had not yet extracted from the ground. They created the jacinto. Think of the jacinto not just as a loan, but as a short-term contract, a bridge of liquidity guaranteed by future silver shipments. It allowed the crown to pay its soldiers today with the promise of the treasure fleet arriving tomorrow. It seemed like a miracle. It allowed Philip II to project power far beyond his immediate cash reserves. But the bankers knew the risks. They understood that the sea was treacherous and that wars were unpredictable. So they demanded high interest, and more importantly, they demanded collateral. When the short-term jacintos could not be repaid, the bankers offered a solution. They would convert this short-term debt into long-term bonds called juros. These juros paid a steady stream of income, secured by the tax revenues of the Castilian peasant. The bankers transformed the king's insolvency into a perpetual annuity for themselves. They captured the tax stream of the empire. Consider the life of a wool merchant in Burgos during this time. He sees the silver flowing into the country, yet he feels poorer every year. The prices of grain, cloth, and fuel are rising relentlessly. Phenomenon historians now call the price revolution. He does not understand the monetary velocity or the influx of bullion. He only knows that the king's wars never end and the taxes never go down. He sees the Genoese bankers building palaces, while his own savings buy less and less. He is witnessing the transfer of wealth from the productive economy to the financial superstructure. The incentive for the bankers was clear: keep lending. If they stopped, the king would default, and their previous loans would evaporate. They were trapped in the cycle just as much as the king. They had to roll over the debt, add the interest to the principal, and pray for the next silver fleet. But the arithmetic is always faster than the galleons. By 1557, the debt had become mathematically unpayable. The interest payments alone consumed the majority of the crown's revenue. The bankers could no longer hide the reality. Philip II was forced to declare the first sovereign bankruptcy of his reign. He suspended payments to the fuggers. The shockwave was instant. The credit of Europe froze. The merchant in Burgos saw his trade collapse because no one could trust a bill of exchange. Miracle of credit had turned into a nightmare of insolvency. The bankers had facilitated a fantasy that destroyed the real economy. Just like the Spanish Empire, the German Empire 3 centuries later found itself trapped by the same impossible mathematics, but with a more modern industrial efficiency. The year is 1914. The location is Berlin. The man is Rudolf Havenstein. He is the president of the Reichsbank, a man of impeccable reputation, a dedicated civil servant, with a stiff collar and a belief in the destiny of the German state. He is the banker they don't want you to know about, not because he was evil, but because he was obedient. When the Great War began, Havenstein made a fateful decision. He suspended the convertibility of the mark to gold. He authorized the creation of loan bureaus, Darlehenskassen, which could issue credit against real assets and securities. He believed he was financing a short, victorious war. He was unlocking the liquidity needed to defend the fatherland. But the war was not short, and it was not victorious. By 1918, Germany was defeated, humiliated, and saddled with a crushing debt load, both from its own war spending and the reparations demanded by the Allies. The logical, prudent move would have been a massive austerity program, a default, and a painful restructuring. But the political cost was too high. The streets were filled with returning soldiers, communists, and nationalists. Stability was the priority. So Havenstein made the choice that defines the modern central banker. He chose to print. He believed that the primary duty of the Reichsbank was to keep the government funded and the economy moving regardless of the monetary consequences. He looked at the private sector, which was screaming for liquidity to pay wages, and he provided it. He discounted commercial bills without limit. He monetized the government's debt directly. The mechanics were bureaucratic and dull. A businessman would write a bill of exchange. A private bank would accept it. The Reichsbank would buy it with freshly printed marks. The money supply exploded. Imagine a university professor in Heidelberg in 1922. He has spent his life saving for his retirement. He has a pension fund denominated in marks that he believed would ensure a comfortable old age. He watches with confusion as the price of a cup of coffee rises from mere pfennigs to hundreds of marks. He assumes it is a temporary supply shock. He assumes the government will fix it. He trusts Dr. Havenstein. But Havenstein is trapped. He argues that the inflation is caused by the balance of payments deficit, not his printing presses. He argues that if he stops printing, industry will halt, unemployment will surge, and the Bolsheviks will take Berlin. The incentive is to keep the machine running. By 1923, the tragedy reaches its terminal velocity. The French occupy the Ruhr industrial heartland to extract reparations in kind. The German government orders a policy of passive resistance. Workers are told to strike, and the government promises to pay their wages. How? Havenstein prints them. The numbers lose all meaning. A tram ticket costs billions. The professor's life savings are not enough to buy a single egg. He is not just poor. He is erased. His class, the educated bourgeoisie, is liquidated by the inflation. The wealth has not disappeared. It has moved. It has moved to the speculators who borrowed marks to buy hard assets, factories, land, foreign currency. It has moved to the industrialists, like Hugo Stinnes, who became the king of inflation, owning a vast empire built on cheap debt. Havenstein died in November 1923, just as the currency collapsed completely. He died believing he had done his duty. He had kept the state alive, but he had killed the society. The trust between the citizen and the state was broken, paving the way for the darkness that followed. Just like Weimar Germany, the nation of Zimbabwe in the early 21st century demonstrates that this pattern is not limited to Europe or the past. It is a universal law of political economy. The year is 2003. The setting is Harare. The figure is Gideon Gono, the newly appointed governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. The political context is the desperate survival of the ruling party. The economy is crumbling under the weight of land seizure sanctions and mismanagement. Production has collapsed. Tax revenues have evaporated. Gono is the banker. He is tasked with the impossible: keep the government functioning without any real income. He does not shy away from the role. He embraces it with a terrifying creativity. He describes his role as extraordinary measures for extraordinary times. The mechanism he employs is quasi-fiscal activities. This is a technical term for a simple reality. The central bank stops being a bank and becomes the entire government. The RBZ starts buying farm equipment. It starts importing fuel. It starts paying the salaries of the police and the army. It starts funding the elections. Where does the money come from? It comes from the computer terminal at the Reserve Bank. Gono introduces bearer checks. Initially, they are temporary notes with expiration dates designed to alleviate a shortage of cash. But soon, they become the currency itself. The denominations grow thousands, millions, billions, trillions. Consider the life of the schoolteacher in Bulawayo. She wakes up at 400 a.m. to queue at the bank. She is allowed to withdraw a maximum limit, which by the time she reaches the teller is barely enough to pay for the bus ride home. The price of bread changes 3 times a day. She stops teaching because the cost of commuting exceeds her salary. She turns to the black market, trading US dollars in back alleys because the national currency is a lie. The incentive for Gono and the regime is survival. If they stop printing, the soldiers don't get paid. If the soldiers don't get paid, the regime falls. The arithmetic of power dictates that the currency must die so the government can live. By 2008, the inflation rate is estimated in the sextillions. The store shelves are empty. The water system fails. Cholera breaks out. The middle class has wiped out, their pensions and savings reduced to zero. The wealth has transferred to those with access to the official exchange rate. The politically connected, who can buy US dollars at the official rate from the yes dollars, at the official rate from the yaste. Central bank and sell them on the street for 1 trillion% profit. The banker has successfully facilitated the greatest theft in the nation, as history, all under the guise of monetary management. The pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages. Stage 1 is sound money. The nation is rising. The currency is backed by something tangible: gold, silver, or a rigid peg. The government lives within its means. Confidence is high. The banker is a custodian, not a creator. Stage 2 is expansion. The nation becomes ambitious. It wants to fight a war, build a welfare state, or project power. The expenses rise. The banker creates a little extra credit. It feels like prosperity. Asset prices rise. Everyone is happy. Stage 3 is the turning. The debt load becomes noticeable. The interest payments start to crowd out productive spending. The government cannot raise taxes without political suicide. The banker begins to actively manage the yield curve, keeping interest rates artificially low to help the state borrow. Stage 4 is inflation. The artificial liquidity leaks into the real economy. Prices rise. The government blames speculators, supply chains, or foreign bad actors. The banker assures the public it is transitory. They print more to subsidize the rising costs. Stage 5 is financial repression. The inflation is now undeniable. The banker and the state join forces to trap capital. They implement capital controls. They force pension funds to buy government debt. They cap prices. They criminalize the ownership of alternatives, like gold or foreign currency. Stage 6 is the crack-up boom. The public loses faith. They realize the currency is a melting ice cube. There is a flight to real assets. The stock market might soar in nominal terms, but in real terms, the economy is collapsing. The velocity of money explodes as everyone tries to get rid of the currency as fast as possible. Stage 7 is the reset. The currency is abandoned. A new unit of account is introduced. The debts are wiped out, usually along with the savings of the middle class. The wealth transfer is cemented. The game restarts. Just like the Spanish juros, just like the Weimar mark, just like the Zimbabwe dollar, current data suggest we are deep within this cycle today. The modern banker is not a single individual, but a collective system of central banks. The Federal Reserve, the ECB, the Bank of Japan. The names change, Paolo Lagarde, Kuroda, but the incentives are identical to Havenstein's. Look at the response to the 2008 crisis and the 2020 pandemic. The solution was identical. To the Jacinto and the Darling's-Kasson massive liquidity injections, quantitative easing, the purchase of government debt and mortgage-backed securities on an industrial scale. The balance sheets of the major central banks have expanded from a few trillion to tens of trillions. The mechanisms are more sophisticated. They use reverse repos and yield curve control. They talk about neutral rates and symmetric inflation targets, but the arithmetic is the same. Governments of the West are running deficits that are mathematically unpayable through taxation alone. The debt to GDP ratios have surpassed the levels of World War II. One interpretation is that we are currently transitioning from stage 4 to stage 5. We have seen the inflation. We have heard the transitory narrative. Now we are seeing the signs of financial repression. The discussion of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, is the ultimate tool for this stage, a way to control the velocity and direction of capital. Just as the Spanish crown tried to control the flow of silver, critics will argue that this time is different. They will say that the US dollar is the world reserve currency and has no competitor. They will say that modern monetary theory allows for infinite expansion as long as there is slack in the economy, but the incentive structure refutes this. The incentive for the U.S. government, facing $34 trillion in debt and over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities, is to inflate the debt away. The alternative is a default that would shatter the global financial system under these constraints. The rational move for the banker is to sacrifice the value of the currency to preserve the system. The risk is that, like Havenstein, they lose control of the psychological component, the trust of the public. The endgames proceed in a fixed order, first controlled decline. This is the goal: to run inflation slightly higher than interest rates for a decade. This is financial repression. It slowly bleeds the saver to pay the debtor. It is a slow-motion default. We saw this in the post-World War II era, where debt was inflated away over 30 years. Second chaotic collapse. If the controlled decline fails, if a shock hits the system, a war, a pandemic, a loss of confidence, the velocity of money spikes. The central bank is forced to print, to buy every bond nobody else wants. This is the Weimar scenario. The currency enters a death spiral, third reset and restructure. Out of the chaos, a new system is born. It might be a return to a hard asset standard, a new digital currency backed by a basket of commodities, or a total revaluation of gold. In 1944, it was Bretton Woods. In 1971, it was the petrodollar. The next reset will be equally profound. The only variable is timing and pain. Those who understand the role of the banker do not listen to what he says. They watch what he does. They watch the expansion of the balance sheet. They watch the purchase of real assets. They do not save in the currency that is being debased. They educate themselves on history. They build resilience in their skills, their community, and their understanding of the macro machine. Subscribe to continue this investigation. Pay attention to the data, not the headlines. The ledger never lies.